It'll be an honor. Ishook and Creator, we come before you in a humble way. We thank you for this day. We give thanks for the four directions and the four winds. We give thanks to all that is above. No, we give you thanks for allowing us one more day to walk upon our Mother Earth. Ishook Creator, we give thanks for the Mother Earth. We ask her to continue to sustain us in all other life. We tell her one day our bodies will return to her. Ishook and Creator, we thank you for giving us, we thank you and give greetings to Grandfather Sky. We give her thanks for the warm sun that she brings on a daily basis as she travels from east to west. We thank her for the light that allows us to see a great beauty of Mother Earth. Ishook and Creator, we thank you and ask you to watch over our relatives, the four-legged. We give thanks for what they have given us. Ishook and Creator, we thank you for the birds, the winged ones. We give thanks for their beauty and the songs that fill the air. We honor the trees and the healing plants and herbs that hold so much knowledge of life and are our guardians. We give thanks for all they have taught us and still continue today to teach us. Ishook and Creator for the water that is the giver of life. I give great thanks indeed. We thank you for all that is on, above, below, upon Mother Earth. Ishook and Creator, my most humble prayer is for the two-legged, the human beings, for they are very much out of balance and need to return to the good way, to the old ways, to find love, harmony, peace, and spiritual awakening. We ask you, Ishook and Creator, to reach down and touch our hearts, that we can all live the good life before this pathway of this life is no more. Ishook and Creator, energies, accept my love. Continue to walk with us upon the pathway that helps us in my work. For the work of every human being is to help and to love each other. Thank you.
Well, and Albert, thank you for that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tuma and Albert, and they're going to share their rich knowledge about Indigenous natural law, and I'll just take it over to them, guys. Go ahead, Albert, Tuma.
Okay, if you want me, Albert, I can start the presentation, and then you can, it'll probably will trigger a lot of information from you, and that will be very helpful. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen, and I have a PowerPoint. Don't worry, it's not too long. It's about, and I will go through because I know we only have a few minutes to do this. Anyways, let me share the screen. And well, I first got to get the PowerPoint up, I suppose. Here it is. Yeah, here it is. What happened to the PowerPoint here? Okay, hold on for a second. Let me go back down again and share screen again. There we go. Share that, and I'm going to play it. So, with this in mind, I'm going to minimize everybody's. How do I? Oh, I lost my little thing here. Okay. Okay. I was just trying to. Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Just to know, we're a little ahead of schedule, so you have a little extra time, so don't feel rushed in your presentation.
I'm just trying to find a way to minimize this speaker screen here. Give me 1 second. What I'm going to do is, oh yeah, there it is, right there. Now, there, good, got it.
Okay.
Okay, there it is. Now, first of all, Indigenous legal theory is something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I've come to the thought that I'm going to be using my community, my tribe, my nation as an example for this. Now, each tribe, each nation, each community is fundamentally different from each other. It's, you know, but there's a lot of similarities in how we experience colonization, etc. but there can be just as differences in the same thing. So, I'm going to be using Mi'kmaq or Alnuidasim. Alnuidasim is what I consider to be I argue for the foundational worldview for Illinois justice system. And I use that rooted in Indigenous law. So the first question I always ask is, Net Alnuidasim. What is thinking or looking at things from an Ilnu perspective? And I'm going to use the terminology for Mi'kmaq people is we call ourselves Ilnu, which basically means people of the same tongue. We've been called many names but this is the preferred name we call ourselves, Ilnu. Outside of the community, we'll refer to ourselves as Mi'kmaq. We've been known as Micmac, and another name has been Cape Sable Island Indians and Sourquois, and many different names over time. But we've always referred to ourselves as Ilnu. And there is a historical thing. Even our neighbors to the north of us are called Ilnu, and they spell their names with double L. And then you have the James Bay Cree, which call themselves EU, and then the Montani and Nasapki Innu, and then Inuit. So we're all in that area in the east here, that we call ourselves Ilnu. It's really a particular, in order to get to Indigenous law, we have to start where the foundation is. And that's Alnuidasim. It's really a way of seeing the world around you. Within that worldview, it tells you what the rules, the regulations, the observations and protocols, and how you deal with your relatives. And relatives doesn't necessarily mean just humans. It also refers to your plant relatives, your insect animals relatives, the relatives under the water. There's really how you deal with your relatives in the other 5 worlds. Now, some scholars have argued there are 6 or 8 worlds in the Ilnu worldview. I call these worlds wigwams. And generally speaking, there's about, we got the deep earth wigwam, water wigwam, earth wigwam, root, ghost, sky, light, and ancestor lodges. Sometimes they're called lodges, here in Ilnuegadi, we call them wigwams. And how you move from one world to another is determined by Ilnue Debludahan, the Mi'kmaq legal principles, and these are the principles that are given to everyone through being Ilnui Dasim, and this tells you how you navigate, as you move from the earth world to the ghost world and you encounter your relatives there, or you go into the sky world or light wigwam, and there's the rules and protocols that are embedded in Ilnui Dasim that help you navigate these worlds. And it's this Ilnui Debludahan, that's the Mi'kmaq legal principles. It's really, in some sense, people say, well, that's kind of a little bit far-fetched, right? But it's not. All of us navigate different worlds. As a Ilnu, I navigate the Indigenous world, the Mi'kmaq world. I navigate my own family's world. I navigate, Nova Scotian world. And even in my own profession, I navigate the academia. And there's, as some of you may know, there's a bit of different worlds in academia. You have, the staff, you have the faculty, and you have the administration. And each one of them have their own little rules and protocols. Similar to, as a lawyer, I navigate the court world. I navigate the civil law world. I also navigate the regulatory world. So really, all of these rules and regulations, they're everywhere in different senses, and everyone navigates different worlds. So, Mi'kmaq, Ilnue Debludahan, these Mi'kmaq principles of legality. Where are these principles? And often that's the first question people tend to ask me, because they don't really understand. And so I tell them, well, these legal principles are in stories, ceremonies, the language, the songs, chants, and dances, and particularly, and my focus has been, I've looked at the language, and you'll see later on how I've done it. I've used embodied the linguistic approach to finding these Mi'kmaq legal principles. Instead of looking at the revised statutes of Canada or the revised statutes of Nova Scotia to find all the laws and rules and the regulations that are enacted, I go to my language, I go to the stories, I go to ceremonies, I go to the songs, and I look and participate in dances. And that's where these legal Unama'ki are located. And I'm going to give you a good example. Ben Christmas was a captain in the Migma Grand Council. He was a leader in Member 2, First Nation, a number of years ago. And he was born on the Old Kings Royal Reserve, and he lived in Port Maureen, and he died in Amherst at the age of 70. But he kept the chants alive in living memory, and they're recorded and they're posted on the website in Member 2 Petroglyphs. And also, John Noel, my great-grandfather from Bachtenkeck, he left us the story, and he told us, and he told our family that all of our songs and chants come from sisip, the birds. That's how we learned all of our chants and our songs, by listening to our relatives in the sky, the birds, the winged relatives. So, of course, I'm also an amateur bird photographer, so whenever I get a chance, I give a shout out to myself, and I hope everybody's looking at this, white-throated sparrow that I took a picture of in the background and singing his song out. And we often joke in Mi'kmaq that some of the birds actually speak Mi'kmaq, like, for example, crows and ravens, right? So all birds, in particular, I say all birds, especially these sisip or gypjeejus, they gave us the songs and chants, and that's where our Unama'ki are located in, the rules and the regulations. So, and I'm going to go back to Ben Christmas now, and I have the link here if you wanted to listen to it. And I'm going to use the Canadian Constitution. I'll get to that in a minute, and I'm trying to get everything here. In this song, in particular, storytelling in a song that Ben Christmas recorded back in the day, he tells us he calls it the marriage song. But when I listened to it, I remember listening to it, and I thought to myself, oh my God, that's the song that my cousin Joey Gould used to sing. And Joey used to sing it slightly differently. He had a slight different pronunciation of one part of it. And that resulted in me thinking, oh my God, Joey's singing another drunken song. Joey had a few beers, he'd pull out the guitar and start singing. And, but when I listened to Ben sing this chant, I realized exactly what he was saying. Part of the song says, "Al dali dut, al dali dut, al dali dut," which means the person is moping around. They're not happy, And I'm like, that makes perfect sense in the context of this marriage song, And in some ways, the solemnization of marriage in the Mi'kmaq community is that, and how Ben informs us in this story and chant, he tells us that a young man informs his parents that he's ready to marry. The parents have a feast, a Wigabaltuktim, and invite all whoever's interested in marrying this young man, and they come. Sometimes nobody comes, but it also indicates a choice on the part of the women, right? That they, if they're interested, they come. If they're not, they're not, right? So, and everyone, the young man sings, and then each one sings back. And if the young man is really essentially singing a hunting song, or Nuduglimpkowe, 3 times, and then he picks a bride, But that's not the end of the solemnization part. This young man does groom service for 1 year, And after a year, there's another Wigabaltuktim, another feast. And both parties, both spouses, come back to the community, and they invite everyone in the community, and they announce whether this marriage is successful or it's not successful, and that they both sing songs. If there was a success in the song, if the marriage was successful, it was a happy, feasting song. But if it was not successful, both of them would sing the song, and that's where the phrases I picked up on, "Nige al dalidut, nige al dalidut, al dalidut," Now, so they say that's the person he wanted to marry, but now he's not happy and moping around. And in some sense, the crux of a foundation of a marriage was that you had to be happy with each other, And then if you weren't, so the young woman would go back to her family and the young man would go back to his family, and they would both be free to marry again. That's this dissolution of a marriage or divorce. So Migma, the legal principles regarding solemnization and dissolution of a marriage and is contained in this song and chant and ritual ceremonies, the Wigabaltuktim, and what needs to be done. Colonization occurs. The British North American Act, which is now the Constitution Act of 1982, UINR Act of 1867, establishes Section 91, the heads of authority for the federal government to enact legislation over many different heads of power. And also Section 92 of the BNA Act authorizes the provincial governments to enact legislation over specific different heads of power. So these are the two areas. Section 91.26 and Section 92.12 took the legislative power, or this solemnization power, these laws that UNLUS had, and took it away from Indigenous tribes and reallocated it to the federal and provincial government. So that's now we have the Indian Act. That's one example of where you will find Ulnuwe Debludan or Mi'kmaq legal principles. Sorry about that. I should have shut off my cell phone here, and I'm going to do that right now before we continue. There, my cell phone is shut off. I'll never hear another text like that for a while. Now, if you want to look at where Ulnuwe Debludan or indigenous legal orders or laws are located, they're located in the language, stories, ceremonies, songs, chants. Basically, they're located in the worldview of Ulnu people. And I would posit that you might find similar locations for other tribal laws. Now, I can't be sure of that, but that's my position, is that you might want to try there. Like for example, Anishinaabe law. Look in the Anishinaabe language first. Coast Salish law. Look in the Coast Salish longhouse ceremonies. Or any other ways. But basically, I tell people, start with the language. That's why it's so vital and important that part of the work that we do in conservation or in the environmental aspect of it, that we also argue that the preservation of indigenous languages and, at the very minimum, is part of conservation work, the work that we do. So, and I further narrow it down a little bit more in ceremonies. When we look at justice as healing ceremonies, and people often talk about, we need the laws or justice to be more healing, with restorative practices, etc. Well, I looked in the language and I thought, well, what is there, And I've come up with this approach to dispute resolution processes. And the first stage is Obala Maduk Tijik. There's a dispute here happening. The role of the community facilitators or the community dispute resolution folks is that they need to move the parties from Obala Maduk Tijik to Betka Maduk Tijik, which Betka Maduk Tijik is a term that we use to describe a separation of the parties, a need for a calming down, a type of refereeing, to allow the emotion, to separate the parties, to allow the emotions to calm down so that we may need, And then once this has happened or this has occurred, and it takes as long as necessary, then you move the parties from Betkama Dijik to Abiksik Dadijik. Now, contemporary understandings of the word Abiksik Dadijik means they forgive each other. And sometimes people think about this forgiveness in the Christianity context, or more specifically in the Roman Catholic context. But this is not what it really means here. It's a type of forgiveness. Yes, abiksik tadijik. they've come to an agreement in a way, right? And it's more like an agreement. This is how we will resolve the dispute. This is how I understand what has happened, and this is how we're going to resolve it. Basically, it's a type of an agreement. In some ways, you can, consider it to be like a treaty, a mini treaty, or anything like that. Abik Tadijik is really about agreeing to, live together and resolve the dispute. But that's not the end. And often, many times, our Unwe Debludan, our Migma legal principles tell us that that's not enough to do. You need to go further, and you need to take the next step, is Wigabal Tuktijik, Wigabal Tuktin, and that's the feasting ceremony. You need to bring people together and have a feast to restore the balance or restore the relationship to where it was before the dispute happened. There is an acknowledgement that it will never be the same. No matter what has happened, the relationship will never quite be the same. But in small communities, in a small natural family setting, folks still have to live with each other, and they still have to, dependent on each other. And they still, in order to survive, you need the support of your community, your family, your friends, your nation. And that's why Wigabal Tuktin is very important in this part, And always we move, and that, this healing, this dispute is kind of in a state of flux, and it always kind of needs renewal, much like how energy decreases in the natural state. Like, here we are, we're entering fall here, everything has stopped growing. The plant world, all the plants world now are, storing up energy for the long winter. So they've reached their gun, their energy is going down, they will store themselves. There are particular ceremonies that they will do in the spring when life springs back forth again. So same thing with relationships. Generally speaking, in Ilnuwe de Blodan is about how we establish and maintain our relationships with each other and with all of our relatives in all of the other worlds. So, but people say, well, stories and songs and stuff, that's all in the past. It's way in the past. We're now living in a contemporary thing. Well, you can find Unwe Debludan or indigenous laws or legal principles in the very old stories. We have creation stories, how Gluskap created the world, Migmagi, and how it explains how we got here and what happened, and explains how things lie where they are. Often I look at Clifford, and I remember those times when we go on hikes to Gluskap's cave, and along the way Clifford will stop us and he'll point us to the bird downs where he tells us the story about how Gluskap broke his canoe, and that's why the islands are there. That's Gluskap's canoe. Contact stories. Not all stories have to be very old. They can also be not too old. But when I say here in Onuegadi, we say not too old, we basically mean 400 or 500 years old. Other parts of the Canadian state, you'll find that not too old means 100, 200 years old. For example, we often heard the story about how fishing for cod. When the French came over, we were told that our elders used to talk about how funny it was that these French explorers, they would come and fish for cod, nothing but cod. They eat cod in the morning, cod at lunch, cod at dinner. They filled up their ships with cod. God knows what they were doing with all this cod. And then until they got so tired of cod, they begged the Ilnu to go hunt meat for them, And then part of it was like, they would tell the story about how France was a paradise. And Ilnus looked at them and said, then why do you risk your life to come across here to fish for cod? And it was kind of a humorous story, And then everyday stories. Everyone in indigenous community always tells a story. Even the children, everything, they tell stories about what happened in their lives today, how they navigated the different worlds that they were in, and some of these stories are not easy to listen to, I had a grade 8 substitute teacher. She just graduated from the normal college in Truro. It was wonderful. She came to the Indian day school, and she was all bubbly and everything. And she, we were all in grade 8, and she told us that we can all be, we were to pick a career. Some were to be police officers, nurses, doctors, lawyers, firemen. And she broke us all in groups and said to us, "Now discuss what you want to be." So when it came to my group, my baby John, little John, came to me, "Tuma, you're the smartest one in here. You tell them what we're going to be." I'm like, "Okay." So when she came around to us and she said, "What did your little group decide you're going to take as a career?" I got up and I proudly announced, "We're going to be on welfare." And she said, "Oh, no, God's sakes, no, you can't be doing that. You can't, that's not an option," and everything. I'm like, "Why not?" No. And then baby John got up and said, "That's what we see our lives at. There's no future. There's no firemen. There's no nurses. There's no new nurses, no new doctors, no new lawyers. You're telling us that we can be all these things and we know we can't. And we're going to be stuck here." So, and the poor teacher, she was just devastated, her blown. And I think, and he told her, "Don't give us hope when there's no hope here." And so I just caution folks, when you're listening to stories and you're looking for Ilnua Debludan, even in the everyday stories you're going to hear, stories are going to be also about trauma. The Indian residential schools, where everybody had stories to tell about that, and these were stories of difficult things. But you can also listen to these stories, and if you hear them right, you will see and pull out other things. We did a research project on social assistance and what Beatonaway was prior to the establishment of the social welfare state here in Nova Scotia. And some of our elders said, one of our elders, she's since passed on, she commented about how they used to use flour sacks and make their clothes from these flour sacks and their underclothes, their underclothes. And my two researchers, which were young, Migma students, they were very appalled, and they said, "Oh my God, that is a very terrible story." I said, "You're not quite listening well. She's telling you how skilled she is at sewing and how skilled the elders are at sewing and changing even a cloth cotton bag into clothes. That's
I
how
find all
skilled they
these
were."
things so tough to stomach as a freelancer, period. While I may learn something, I'm not getting paid today to be on this thing, period. Which is a very cynical perspective to take, I think, but also, a blunt assessment of reality.
Not sure what's going on here. You want me to continue here or what?
I just want to remind everyone on the call if they could please put their computers on mute. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, let's go back here. Then I'll share the screen again. I'll just finish up here quickly. So, and the key is how, going back to this elder's skills, and this elder said, "Don't worry about the elders. We know how to survive. Contemporary times, nobody's teaching these same skills again, So all of these stories where you're going to find Ilnua Deblodagans are journey stories. They're journeys into the unknown, into the deep forest. It's similar when we go out and look at conservation issues, right? So let me go back here. And so I'm just going to quickly go over the language here. Ilnua language is Proto Algonquin. It's verb-based. All of our, very few nouns is verb-based, is action-oriented. And the language purpose is about how to establish and maintain relationships. It's how you experience an event as opposed to the nature of the event. The example that's often given is, I don't walk across a room, but you're walking across in where, And the language, and this from a linguist, points out that evidential endings on the verbs indicate these relationships between the life forces and that these are our relationships. So when we look at legal or justice-related words, how we find these words or concepts in the language or in ceremonies or anything, we think about words like ilsudiget, to make right, to judge correctly, to correct the person, right? And another one is nijodiget. Nijodiget is often used in the context of a marriage or witnessing or a best man or something like that. But the process of it is ceremony, you're witnessing and you witness the event, and then thus your story becomes the official story. There's another word, anustumagwet. It's kind of like related to karma. People say you caused the pain, now your family has suffered a similar pain. So the challenges, and I'm not going to go into these challenges too much because I know Albert has to speak in a few minutes here, is helping folks understand where these Unama'ki come from and how to incorporate it into contemporary situation. For example, the Ben Christmas song. I now sit as a justice of the peace, and I do weddings, and with Unu weddings, I talked to them and I said, do you want a very traditional Unu wedding or do you want a contemporary traditional Unu wedding? And if they wanted a very traditional one, I tell them, one of them, you have to sing your hunting song, you have to do a drum service, all that stuff, right? Often they change their mind and they want just a regular one. So the last point I just want to make is that Indigenous legal theory is a theory unto its own. When I was doing research on all the various legal theories, and all my instructors, professors, and mentors were saying, well, see if you can locate it into these legal theories. And like, for example, legal pluralism, the existence of two or more different types of legal systems and structures. Legal pluralism is actually rooted in African colonization. And so the displacement of one legal order and superseded by another. And when it could not do that, they created legal pluralism. So I'm not so sure that's a right fit for it. Natural law, well, natural law, as I studied in law school, is that it is rooted in Christianity, or the natural law of humans, having dominance over the natural world. I'm not sure that it fits in there. Feminist legal theory, or feminist critical legal analysis, economic legal theory, critical legal theory, or critical race legal theory, or liberal legal theory. You have all these various legal theories, and throughout it all, Unama'ki, or indigenous legal theory, can fit in, but it doesn't quite fit in well. So I went back and I said, well, it needs to stand on its own. Let's create a new legal theory and start contributing to the scholarship associated underneath on that. And so that's my presentation. Walalyo.
Thank you, Tuma. Albert, maybe you can talk a little bit from your perspective about Indigenous law and your understanding of natural law, and what's the importance of it in Indigenous conservation efforts.
Oh, you're just on mute, Albert.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
But I can't. I'm trying to bring up the screen again.
We can hear you just fine, Albert.
But anyway, I can't see anybody. But anyway, that's all right. I don't have to be seen. Yeah. Anyway, in my humble opinion, the word nedukuling is, to me, it's a fundamental principle. That's how we go through life. Because in that concept, it always reminds us what our responsibilities are. And in order for anyone to live any part of our home, which is the world in our understanding, is that we all have that responsibility always to ensure that no action that we'll ever take would cause any form of a negative reaction. In this case, our actions cannot and should not compromise the ecological integrity of the area, because it's a system which we all totally depend upon. So therefore, our efforts has to be focused. Most of our energy has to be focused as to how do we, on a daily basis, individually, collectively, and so on, keep exercising our responsibilities and to ensure that none of us will ever do anything that will compromise that integrity. With the realization, of course, that someone will not be so accommodating. So under this term nidigulim, I believe we had a system called Tetbaal Dimkawi, or now what it's been referred to, I believe, is Debludak, which I have a tendency to understand that Tetbaal Dimk, and who's the one that should be set on the straight path? It's the Tulik. So we take upon that as a collective responsibility, because along the way, there's going to be some that are not going to be so accommodating or so conscious, because they are human beings, and greed, individualism, pride, and so on, these are overarching challenges that they have. So in my simple way of thinking, that I am hoping that as we are engaging ourselves into this dialogue of co-learning, that we not only find comfort of searching and embracing other ways of knowing, in which whether that group of people, no matter where that group of people may reside in our home, what they are doing, but always should be some effort made as to how can we give ourselves an opportunity to exchange ideas and stories with the other group to further enhance our responsibilities while we are here. Because I believe the reason why this work, our Creator, has put into this place 4 colors, the 4 races, in which each race will have gifts and responsibilities to eventually share with the other groups, no matter where they may be located geographically. Because just like the diversity of environment, our nature, therefore, these different ways of knowing has to be and will be in line with the diversity of the geographical area, no matter where it may be. And I think this is something that I honestly and truly believe, with that deep understanding, without actually saying it, that always nature has rights, and that we humans have responsibilities. Because I believe we are the only species upon this beautiful creation of ours that have something that no other creature has, and that is that cognitive mind, in which we should always exercise that gift to benefit everyone, except, especially use those gifts as to how we navigate through this time in which we are given to spend here. And always to use that to ensure that individually, collectively, no one will be given or will be allowed to take any action that might compromise the well-being of the system, and in turn will compromise the health and well-being, not only to all the species, but especially to humanity. Unfortunately, though, I believe somehow, somewhere along the line, we have forgotten or led to believe that that particular aspect of that knowledge is maybe too redundant, that it has no application to this very moment. But just like nature, I honestly and truly believe our languages had to evolve to always keep in pace of where our Earth Mother is taking us. Because if we were not in tune with her, I don't honestly believe our ancestors could have survived as long as they did. And with that, I believe we're still very, very anxious and mindful that we would like very much to be included, to be involved as to how can we continuously share some of those overarching gifts that not only sustained our ancestors, but also managed very successfully of not ever compromising the ecological integrity of the area. So I believe that, and I really applaud Tuma for the work that he's doing, because in my humble opinion, that's where he has to start. It has to become obvious to us that any new initiative, any new idea will not work if it only remains on the ground level. It has to go to the highest point. And I honestly and truly believe institutions are in that position at this point, where they are the ones that have provided the kind of an education in which we benefit today with all the good ways, good life that we're enjoying. But I believe as well, though, that that education system, I believe, has to now be reminded that their efforts are not only should be providing knowledge to the humans to be comfortable, to be well off, and so on, but also to use that knowledge of helping people that go through those systems, of not ever forgetting what their inherent responsibilities are. Yes, just like Nebuchadnezzar says, you have a privilege to harvest the gifts of the Creator, but you never have the right to compromise the integrity of that sacred system, because we are so much connected and dependent upon her for our every need, especially now where our air has been compromised. Our clean drinking water has been compromised. The fertile soils have been compromised, in which the extraction is so vast that she cannot even find time to regenerate. And here we have before us is such a wonderful knowledge and tool called Western science. And the question that has not been asked publicly to date yet is, when are we going to transform this energy, not just to be the arm of destruction, but also an arm of not just mitigating, but also helping people or empowering people that, yes, they can continuously use the gifts of the Creator, but in such a way that their abilities or the future's abilities or the future generations' abilities will never be compromised. Because what's really very, very difficult to understand is that we have to say we have reached a very technological age. We have so many people that are highly educated, yet we're all comfortable in denying that the rate of destruction that is ongoing at this very moment will ultimately and inevitably affect every living thing. So I believe that as difficult as this COVID has put us into a situation, we still have a tendency to believe that our Mother Earth was not prepared to remove us from the equation, but rather to her deep love for us, she said, let's give these humans a second chance and allow them to start reflecting. And in order for us to start reflecting, of course, we have to put ourselves into these crossroads. On one side, we know that how we got here. And we are very conscious of the harm that we have done upon her. And of course, we have that prerogative to decide, is it going to be business as usual? Or are we going to really do some inner reflection, soul searching, if you may, and see, yes, we have, through various ways, inactions, denials, have allowed others to lead us and to continue in this rate of destruction, knowing very well that this arm of destruction will lead us into extinction. But yet, somehow, we still find comfort that maybe there is time, and it is time, in my humble opinion, providing that all these folk races of the earth will come together as one and come up with a common objective as to how do we live from here on in? How do we reawaken the spirit that's been dormant for all these years? How do we reawaken those spirits and say, no matter how little I may be able to do, at least it will be something done. But no, this mindset is so heavy that, and we think we are so comfortable in our little comfort zone that as long as this issue or whatever it is not in my back door, I need not get involved. And I believe that just like the word Tebeludaran, we now have to commit to that concept and use the energy that we all have and to begin to get paradu net, to put straight some of our actions that were not very attuned into what Mother Nature is telling us. And unless we commit to that concept, and I don't know really where the future will lead us into. But I honestly and truly believe, look at us today. I don't know how many people are on here. There are so many people that are going through this idea of, or exploring this idea and really looking seriously. Maybe there is a great need of some kind of a transformative change. Well, let's think about that for a moment and come up with some kind of a conclusion as to how do we begin to remap that journey forward for us. Not only will we always be able to be sustained, but also to ensure that the life that sustains us has to be healthy, balanced, and productive.
Thank you so much, Albert, for those beautiful words.
Now, I don't know how often you're back on the screen though.
We can see you, Albert.
I can't see anything.
Yeah, my video's off at the moment because I didn't have good connection. So I'm not sure. I think there's about 180 people on the call at the moment. I don't think they'll fit all on your screen anyways if you wanted to see us all.
Okay, I'm back on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Albert, for that. And thank you, Duma. So what we heard just now from Albert and Duma, you can see that Indigenous laws are very much grounded in our culture, language, and ceremonies. And as Duma says, they can't be easily related to concepts of Western law, but they are strong enough to stand on their own. And I think Albert reminds us that daily. I've been had the great honor and privilege of having Albert as our elder advisor at UINR for as long as I remember, for as long as I've been there. I won't age either one of us by telling you how long. But such as the concepts of Nediglum that he speaks to has definitely been something that's definitely guided our work. And as Albert as teaches us and reminds us daily that they're essential to our survival, and as he says, the health of the life that sustains us as well. So again, thank you, Albert. And I'm going to transition now to Clifford Paul. Clifford works with myself at the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, and he works in particular on the Moose Management Initiative. And Clifford's going to talk to you now about how we use the concepts of Netaglimp. And as Albert reminds us every day, that though we have a right to that resource, we do have a responsibility in ensuring that that resource is there for ourselves and for future generations. And also that they are an integral part of the ecosystem. So in protecting moose, we do protect in the system as well. So Clifford, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, just to note, started on the moose management plan even before I was hired. We had a series of discussions on moose and the national park. Actually, we had some committees set up prior to 2005 when I came aboard. And when I did get hired for the position for moose management, I thought it was going to be, okay, we're going to design a moose management plan, come up with this document, and it'll be all good and we'll go from there. But that was the easy and simple way of looking at it when I got hired. And I would soon learn that moose management is more than us putting together a paper that's going to sit on a shelf. The moose management plan will represent the way we are as a people and how we adapt and how we change and how we bring forth change based on the concept of Netaglimp and also based on the principles of Migma natural law. So when I first started, they said, Clifford, you're going to manage moose in Unama'ki. I said, that's great. And it didn't take me long to realize that I can't manage moose in Unama'ki. They don't listen to me. They don't want to come off the mountain when I call them. So what I had to do, and I quickly learned that you're not managing moose, you're managing human behavior around moose. And Netaglimp is a concept that guides our behavior in the natural world. So when I realized that I am not managing moose at all, I'm helping to manage human behavior around moose. So I quickly learned that the Moose Management Initiative was basically a series of discussions between the Migma federal and provincial governments. And through those discussions, we are able to build upon Migma principles, Migma worldviews, how we are going to manage moose and moose ecosystems. And that's not, that's just one aspect of it. We also have in-depth discussions with people, knowledge holders in our communities, and we've also developed from them in the 2IC approach the traditional views and the traditional knowledge of what this management plan should look like. So just as we have discussions and deliverables with the province, the feds, and the Migma government, so too with the grassroots. And believe it or not, my work plan stems from directives from the grassroots, and my deliverables all come from input from the grassroots people. So it's not, you don't have a lawyer, a bureaucrat, a chief, and people who were in positions designing the management plan or deciding guidelines for how we're going to respond with Netaglimp and manage the moose in this territory. It is grassroots driven and grassroots based. It all stems from, and my colleague Kerry Prosper talks about this when he says, you know, when we say a prayer and we say Emsit Nogama, and Tuma talked about it in the language. Emsit Nogama means all my relations. But it doesn't mean my uncles, my cousins, my own children and grandchildren, my future heirs and my past heirs. Emsit Nogma means that all my relations in the animal, plant, spirit world, we are made up of all the materials of Mother Earth. Mother Earth created us, Creator, through the Creator. When we pass, all of our being is reabsorbed by other living things, our brothers and sisters. So we're related that way. We're related to the grasses, the salmon, the raindrops, the trees, you name it. So when we say Emsit Nogma, we mean all our relations. And that gives me my sense of place, where I am, who I am, how I am in this natural world, in my behavior. So we are told that everything that casts a shadow has spirit, and everything that has spirit deserves respect. So from that foundation of our sense of place, respect for Mother Earth, Nedogalimp and Migma natural law, I can't say it governs, it determines my behavior. So Nedogalimp, I am bound by the Creator to provide, to sustain myself, and in a modern context to also make a moderate living from my interpretation and behavior within the natural world. So when we were talking about developing a moose management plan, we had a lot of our harvesters who did not receive the benefit of those teachings, and a lot of them were behaving in a way that was not conducive to sustainability, not conducive to the Migma way of approaching the natural world. And we were called in by our elders in the very beginning, to assert Migma jurisdiction and work with communities to discuss how Migma natural law and Nedogalimp are going to be brought into place. And through our plan, our moose management plan, that series of discussions, the series of deliverables, in the past 15 years, just doing this work, we have seen incredible changes of behavior, incredible deliverables, and incredible ways of expressing the things that we need to manage. And from a Migma perspective, it is voluntary. It's incredible because I can look at two contrasts. Our Nova Scotians need a reporting system for manage themselves in and around a natural environment. They also need enforcement. And those are the management tools that are very important for them. And guess what? They're important to us. We are working on those things. But without enforcement and without mandatory reporting, the Migma has an incredible series of what I call deliverables. You know, we have developed our own guidelines, which again, not created by myself, a lawyer and a bureaucrat or an Indian chief. It was created by the grassroots people. And they put together guidelines on how we should approach harvesting in our harvesting activities. We have food distribution in our communities. We have an incredible food distribution service where harvesters bring back moose, berries, salmon, lobsters, striped bass, eels, trout. We have a food distribution which is innate to us, our nature, which is again driven by Migma natural law and driven by Nedogalimp. We have a food distribution system that is unparalleled elsewhere in Canada. We have elders, youth, and community hunts for moose. We have that going on in our with moose management and moose and people accepting responsibility. And we also have a strong education component going on here. We have videos, we have books, I visited over 100 schools and universities. My toughest audience to date is not the RCMP, not BFO, was the grade 2 Mountain View Elementary School in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. So, we have all these things going, and it's very important that we are driven by those concepts. And it's very important that we have teachers in our communities who, not just myself, teachers in our community who are passing on these traditions through activity. And from my point as a practitioner of the two, I have to live it, breathe it, be it, taste it, share it, and pass on the knowledge as a knowledge holder for as long as I can and for as long as I could. Let me see. Yeah, I covered a lot right there. Lisa, you want to chime in on other examples and the roles of the guardians?
Yeah, Cliff, I know when I was thinking about how the guardians were engaged in this, I know with the moose management over the years, way back when, this goes back a number of years, as you recall from our talk yesterday, we were just talking about the same initiative in a different context. But back, oh geez, I want to say early 2000s, the guardians at that time, before the ILI and the land guardian movement, the fishery gardens we relied on to work with other species as well. They were instrumental in the first conversations we had with DNR and Parks Canada on engaging on moose management and how we're going to collaborate between the Migma and the federal and provincial government on a shared management plan and developing that plan. They were also very much on the ground during the management of the moose in terms of helping us engage hunters and go to the stations where people are bringing their moose, the jawbones and whatnot, because as Albert said, we always took a two-eyed seeing approach. So while we gathered traditional knowledge from our hunters, but we also participated in the science and the research that was required. The guardians were very engaged in that as well. And I imagine too the sessions that we had with community, as Cliff said, this directive, for moose management and the approach, the glimpse back to traditional perspectives and styles of management came from community. That direction came from them. And Clifford had sessions across Nova Scotia with all the different Mi'kmaq communities, numerous engagement sessions where, like he said, this concept of Nutaglimp was revisited and grew and was reinvigorated through this process. They were very much part of those discussions as well. So there's lots of examples of how they were engaged. But I guess the biggest point, I guess, for this, Cliff, we were trying to demonstrate is that Nutaglimp was the key founding principle or key thing that we kind of grounded ourselves in when we took on this initiative and to take our place back as stewards of this resource.
Yeah, exactly. We had two major gatherings. Aside from our feasts in the Highlands, the Blair Bernard Feasts in the Highlands, where we gather and we talk informally, and we put aside any differences, whether somebody's there in uniform, whether somebody's there in hunter's orange, whether somebody's there in camouflage. We have informal discussions, which really help. But we've had two major gatherings, which we call symposiums on moose, one in 2009 and another one in 2017. And the driving force is our community members, not just hunters, community members see Nedogalim as the driving principle. How we were able to get this far in management without those tools that Nova Scotians need to manage is something that should be celebrated. And management comes from the heart. It comes from the language. It comes from the people. All the questions I had when I came into this picture, where do we find it all? It was there all this time within us. And all they needed, all our communities needed was that avenue of expression, or those avenues of expression, because we had quite a series of dialogue, which is very important. And bringing in the traditional knowledge that comes with that and hearing the stories. I think if you look at what happened with the mainland moose and the recovery plan for that, they did not look at Mi'kmaq knowledge. It wasn't a major part of what was going on there. And what we have in Unama'ki, we are very lucky. We have people that provided as knowledge holders. They provided traditional knowledge on moose and moose habitat, which helped guides us, not just myself, but UINR and everything we do beyond moose and with moose. You know, when we share in Nova Scotia, we have treaty responsibilities, we have treaty rights, and the world focuses on what that means. And as my elder Albert graciously tells me, with these rights come great responsibility. And it's very interesting to note that the responsibilities now, when we fought for access to hunt moose and to take it to the Supreme Court of Canada and have a series of litigations in our favor, which started almost 100 years ago, 1928 to the present, and is still ongoing. We fought for justice and we got it. And now we have to fight for against the resistance because of that justice. But today, if you look at what happened in that litigation period, we fought so hard for access. Now we are fighting for the strength of our responsibilities. And when you have a shared landscape such as Nova Scotia, you have Nova Scotians and you have Migma. And Albert put this in a very unique way of explaining how it occurs without sounding divisional or racist. So he told me, and you'll remember this, Albert, when I was faced with the challenge of resistance of what happened in the national park when we did our harvest there. I came back to the elders, had some challenges after there was a big protest against us, and I sat down with a few elders, and Albert tells me, you know, picture Nova Scotia as a shared landscape, and it is a checkerboard. It's a checkerboard, and as Mi'kmaq, we are the chess players. We have rights and responsibilities on this board, on this playing surface. We have our own rules and regulations that governs our behavior, and we have our own laws that takes us to play the game of chess. Nova Scotians also share the same surface, and they are the checker players. They have privileges and responsibilities, and they have their own sets of rules and regulations and laws that govern their privileges and their responsibilities. He says it's two games on the same playing surface. It's shared, so too are the resources. Then he asked me, Clifford, what do we have in common? I said, yes, we have rights and responsibilities. Nova Scotians have privileges and responsibilities. So what we have in common are responsibilities and a shared landscape. So when we apply Migma and assert Migma jurisdiction on the shared landscape, it's understood by Nova Scotians who truly want to understand that this is our game and this is our approach, and that we are guided by Netagalim, and we best can apply that through Mi'kmaq natural law. And on the other side of the coin, Nova Scotians are on the shared landscape. They have a privilege, they have responsibilities, and they can access these resources based on their rules and based on their approach. And I think it took a long time for us to get there, and it's still taking us a long time to get there. But the education component that comes with the treaties, that comes with us expressing ourselves without anger, without fear, without resentment, and without fear of repercussion. I think we have those avenues in place, and I think we are moving in a place in natural resource management that will mirror what the challenges of today, but also will mirror the challenges of the past.
Thank you, Cliff. And that's a really good wrap up, I think, for this discussion. And I think it helped ties all the speakers and all the presentations together, because what Duma is so graciously reminding us in the chat is that we've done a lot of work, but there's still a lot of challenges ahead. So though we do have our treaty rights, well, our innate Indigenous rights that are recognized and affirmed both by treaty and the Constitution, there's still a lot of work to do. There is that history that First Nations have, where we were kind of dispossessed of our land and we were removed from our resources. That connection was lost when it was made illegal for us to hunt. So because of those things, as Duma was saying, there's a lot of work initially to, and Cliff alluded it to this as well in his talks about the community engagement and one with the hunters, is there's a lot of work to bring back those concepts of Netagalim and to reawaken that within our Mi'kmaq people. And in addition to that, there's a lot of work to do to kind of find that space and be able to braid those traditional laws and approaches into both Canadian and international law, to have them recognized and acknowledged and supported. And so I thought there was one more thing I was going to say on that, but basically that's it. It's all about bringing that connection, that connection back to the land is such a pivotal component of that, and finding our space back as stewards and making that reconnection to the land, so that we're reminded of our place in this earth and reminded of our responsibility is a key aspect of all that. So with that, we're going to open it to the Q&A. I see there's already some questions that have been coming up in the chat, and I'm going to ask Allison to give me a hand here. This is my first time hosting a webinar like this, so I don't know, Allison, there's questions that you've been tracking?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to read one out?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this question is, do you think it's appropriate to write specific local Indigenous laws into management plans if they only apply to First Nation citizens? Or is it a better approach to weave the principles and guidance of these Indigenous laws into the management so that it applies to all people and activities in parks, while recognizing where they come from, that they come from Indigenous laws?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm gonna leave that to the group. Does anyone want to venture to answer that question?
Yeah, well, you see, what we have been really saying is that it's inevitable that we all now have to coexist. And I think it should be incumbent upon us of actually all embracing the spirit of co-learning. Realizing, of course, that the complexity of nature it's going to require multi-perspectives initiatives to address the real issue that we need to address. But it has to be done on the spirit of co-learning, on the spirit of collaboration. As wonderful as this traditional knowledge is, I honestly and totally believe, have to say, that we need Western science to help us. Because now we have reached a state or a point in our evolution that science can and should play a major role of helping us or guiding us as to how we manage ourselves as we move forward together.
Thank you, Albert.
I guess I'll chime in a little bit about that question. And I'm thinking about, well, you know, sorry about that. I have my window open and the light is bright, so you'll see half my face is illuminated. When people think about weaving Indigenous laws into park protection plans or into First Nations self-government agreements, I don't see that as a major problem. I think that's really wonderful and that should be done and that should be the foundation. And then often we as First Nation or Indigenous peoples, we think that our own laws are not quite as good or not quite as up to date, or that we're looking at something else, anything like that, or that we don't have the full confidence in our own laws. You know, and I'll give you a good example. You know, here in Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Migma Education Authority has given every single community, Migma community, the ability to make laws regarding what level of education attainment should be in our community schools. Almost practically every single one of them follow the provincial curriculum, you know, to achieve the grade 12. The only limitation on that would be that there needs to be transferability, you know, between schools. So when you graduate from a provincial school at the grade 12 level, you graduate from Migma school or grade 12, it's the same level. But I often tell people, you don't have to stop at that level. You can add to it. You know, there is nothing to stop any community from passing a educational law saying that in order to pass grade 12, you have to be fluent in Migma. No, that's more than what the province involves in. You know, you can pass grade 12 without even speaking a single word of Migma in grade 12. So what's wrong with, you know, you can add to it. Indigenous laws may actually bring the bar up higher. So when we're looking at protection and conservation and anything, bringing in Indigenous laws to these management plans or to these overall agreements, you know, self-government agreements, may actually increase, you know, I think they may actually increase the protection and conservation of the resources in various means, right? It doesn't mean that less than, you know, but often that's what we've been told, we've been thinking about, you know, when Ulnu people put their laws in place, that they will behave as if the non-native people. And that's part of the current underlying foundation what's happening in Southwest Nova Scotia. All the fishermen are saying, well, we don't want the Mi'kmaq fishing under their own moderate livelihood fishing because they might fish like us and they'll decimate the fisheries. Whereas the Nudugulin concept, it does authorize a regulatory scheme for Ulnus, but it also at the same time acts as a limit to that. You know, so I often tell people, you know, don't be afraid of Indigenous laws. You know, in fact, you might find that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, if what we want to do is we want, like Albert often says, we want to preserve the sustainability or the integrity of the environment. You may find that Indigenous laws work towards, you know, creating that and making it a sustaining environment, you know. And we also have to, you know, one of the things Indigenous laws also reminds of us that Indigenous people or even humans, we're part of the environment. You know, it also includes regulating us as human beings, and that we make an impact in the environment, whether it's a protected area or a non-protected area in the urban environment. You know, so I look forward very much seeing Indigenous laws as being a source of laws which the justice system agreements can rely upon to create the best possible world that we can all live in.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tuma there that Indigenous law covers many facets of our lives and the complexities of our lives. And in natural resources, prior to contact, we managed the natural world so well, so pristine, and that we would migrate and match our migration patterns to that of the birds, the mammals, and the fish, and that we would meet each species that we harvest at a time when their food value was at their peak, and at a time where we would not negatively impact the population. And if you look at what happened in 1928 when Grand Chief Gabriel Syliboy was charged for trapping muskrat out of season, the provincial season or whatever season law of that time, they said, oh, you're trapping out of season, and he got charged and he used the treaty as a defense. But he was telling the courts he's following medical limb and Migma natural law, same as his ancestors, that he was trapping muskrats at a time when their food and value were at its peak and at its prime. So when we talk about the ancient way, bring it into a modern context, that's why I'm glad we have elders and youth coming together. And that's why I'm glad we have lawyers and community people coming together, because we can formalize these in informal ways, and we can come up with really, really sound regime of how traditional laws can be interpreted in today's modern world that we live in.
Thank you, guys. Wow. A lot to take in there, a lot to digest. I agree 100% with what you guys are saying, and yeah. Allison, is there another question for us? Do we have time for more questions? Yeah, we still got time.
Yeah. So here's another question. This one is about learning more about the community process, maybe more for Lisa and Clifford. So can you explain a little bit more about some of the challenges that you might encounter with community engagement and how you've overcome them?
Clifford, I know you want to jump in here, but one of my favorite stories, I think you tell me about the community sessions and why they were important, because when you do have that one voice, that one naysayer, and they're loud in the group, how when we have our community members there as well, especially the elders present, the impact and that they were able to make, and the quickly how the tone changed when they were present.
Yeah, that's so true. Our first meeting was actually in Yarmouth, one of the communities in Yarmouth, and it was a full townhouse meeting. And they heard that we were going to close down the Highlands and issue tags. So our first series of meetings was to say, no, we're here to develop a management plan on moose. We're going to ask two basic questions. How do you like to see the Migma manage moose in Unama'ki? And how would you like to see the Migma manage moose habitats in Unama'ki? And it took a while for the discussions to take shape, because that long litigation period, that mistrust we've had with DNR, where they arrest us. Some people had the dogs sent after them. Some people were thrown in vans with the dogs, and it was not a pretty relationship at all. So we did a lot of damage control over that. And then one have to understand that this management plan is coming from within, and we control that mistrust out the window. And I know I went to one meeting and this young man was saying, I have a right, I can do this, I can do that, I'm going to do this. He was he was flexing. And his auntie in the same meeting says, you know what? I'm tired of the way you're talking here, because that is not the Migma way. And nephew, that is not the Migma way, the way you're hunting. And she can comfortably say that, and he can comfortably or uncomfortably accept that type of discussion. And it wasn't to correct each other, it was to see where we can take Migma control over, or Migma jurisdiction over management of moose and moose territory. It's pretty interesting. And the engagement sessions, very powerful, very strong, because they're steeped in traditional knowledge. And I have a question there on the lack of engagement in mainland moose. Yes, because it's still available. The traditional knowledge holders and the people who are family members who remember their grandparents or great-grandparents being guides in hunting moose in mainland Nova Scotia, traditional knowledge of that time is still there. And there has not been an avenue to gather that knowledge like we did across the province with moose and Unama'ki. We need that information to be gathered. We need that traditional knowledge to be recorded, because traditional knowledge of mainland moose, as an example, within there's trends, there's changes, there's changes to the landscape, changes to the environment, sea level rise, all these things that happen over global warming, the effects of global warming. I think we're missing the point in with the mainland moose. But in Unama'ki, we were very lucky. We had those engagement sessions, those personal discussions, and a lot of information was gathered, which helps us, again, to take on that two-eyed seeing approach to management.
That's great. Thank you, Clifford. I'm just going to jump on, as I think we have a couple more minutes, we could maybe ask one more question. So this one, it's a little bit about the Yukon, but I think there's broader applicability as well. So this question was, in the Yukon, First Nation governments can create their own legislation under the First Nation self-government agreements. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding that these laws are the only example of Indigenous law. So what resources exist to explain what Indigenous laws are and that better reflect that diversity?
But did you want to maybe speak to that? I know there's some wonderful work that you've been doing around in Indigenous law. Is he still there?
Sure.
Oh, there you are.
My internet sometimes keeps freezing up and I can't really hear people. So
Do you want us to repeat the question?
Can you repeat it?
Yes. So basically the question is, what resources exist that explain what Indigenous laws are? This person is saying that in the Yukon, First Nation governments can create their own legislation under the First Nation self-government agreements. And sometimes that comes with a misunderstanding that the legislation are the only examples of Indigenous law.
Oh.
What resources exist?
Well, I would say, go to your local First Nation community and speak to knowledge holders, and that's where you would go. A lot of times when we look for Indigenous law, we tend to go to the libraries, Carswell, Law, Lexis, or to the textbooks or anything like that. but in this case, if you really want to locate Indigenous laws and you want to, it's all about relationship building, and and this would be a good place. Of course, if you go up to somebody and you say, in the research that I did on ethnobotany a number of years ago, I used to ask the question, so what did your family know about Micmac medicines? And everybody would tell me, I don't have a clue. I don't know. I realized I was asking the wrong questions. I would say, do you remember what your parents used to use when somebody got sick? And they would say, well, they would go outside and pick this plant, and it was round, the leaves and everything like this, and they would describe it. And by deducing it, I would probably be able to say, okay, well, that's that one. That's this plant, right? Have a basic knowledge, right? And in similar, you'll have to also realize that Indigenous laws has undergone a tremendous impact of colonization. So people will be, I tell people where I love to start is in the language. If in the Yukon you have Dene people, go and speak to Dene speakers and ask them what concepts in their language, have to do with, how they regulate and how people's behavior is towards the natural world. What are they supposed to do when they hunt a moose up in Yukon? About harvesting medicine? What about rabbit snaring or any of those things? What are the protocols? What are the things? And that from there on you can pull it out. So yeah, and people will say, well, I'm not a speaker, or I'm a, what we say, a glacier. I'm non-native. How do I do this? Well, if you just open and you're just willing to learn and say, you know what, I'm willing to learn and I want to ask a few questions, and together we'll go on this journey. And sometimes it takes a long time. Now, to give a brief background, there are many articles, and I think one of the dialogues here is going to come up with my colleague, John Burrows. He's speaking, I think, at the next event. John has written a number of books. And if you just Google his name, go to, I guess in the age of COVID, you just can't run to the local bookstore, right? So I suppose you can go on Amazon and get some of his books, instead of having sent down. Articles, if you are lucky enough to have access to university library articles, journal articles, John has written a number of things that are excellent. There is one that came out of the Center for International Governance and Excellence, it's a think tank outside of Kingston, CG, we call it CG. They have some articles there, journal articles that are written. So yeah, but if you're local, go to your local community and speak to some speakers, language speakers, knowledge holders, and talk to them and ask them to consider what words, and it'll start off small. They might say, like for example, both Albert, Clifford, Lisa, and myself, we briefly talked about the concept of Nedugulink, right? That's an Innu concept of harvesting, the bounty of the land that the Creator has provided. But I was thinking about it, and that word really came about after 1985. It wasn't used in really everyday language in Migma community. Even though there was a lot of speakers, it was only after the court case was won in 1985, and then Donald Marshall Sr. issued a proclamation of inter-moose hunting guidelines and using Nedugulink. And I was like, wow, I've never heard this word before. I got to learn about this, And, Clifford's brother, Danny, when he goes moose hunting, he has a ceremony that he does, and within the ceremony, there's an expression of what Mi'kmaq Innu laws are. So if you're up in the Yukon, think about, watch folks. It's a little bit more than just, I don't want people to walk away, think ceremony, song, chants, well, it's all nice and good and makes you all feel good and fuzzy warm, or that it's all what is new agey or rather old agey, I suppose. But it actually contains the laws. It's like opening up the revised statutes of Canada and finding all the rules, regulations in there. Right? The difficulty is that it's in a different form, it's in a different language, than what we all are used to and in a different space. And that's the work is really getting to that place, into that space where you're able to read, see, experience it, and utilize it. So I know that that's not a short and easy answer to the folks from Yukon about Yukon Parks Management, but the overall overarching legal principle, I would say that, you know, that's in verb-based languages like even the Dene up north there, or other tribes up there, or even under Yukon self-government agreements, you know, or the umbrella agreement of the Yukon, you can say how relationship is the foundation of how we're going to manage. And that goes back to the two-wide scene approach that Albert has, and Clifford has, you know, mentioned, and Lisa. So in the management plans, start by bringing in Indigenous law, start by reaching out and asking knowledge holders and elders, and be willing to explore and make, you know, possibly make mistakes. You know, we're not going to get it all at once. But if it's going to enhance the work that you do, and I foundationally believe that when we bring in new laws or Indigenous legal principles, such as Nidugulin, it only enhances the work that we all do in the environmental world that we all share in.
And I just like to add that, or somehow maybe Clifford's words are not resonating here, that any law is not meant to govern nature. But any law that we initiate as humans is only intended to manage people of ensuring their behavior will not compromise the integrity of the area in which they're living. So I believe there's some work has to be done on that. How do we articulate this in the future so that this message is very straightforward, that the laws of man are only designed to manage humans and not nature. Does that make sense?
And finally, you may want to think about the concept of the middle ground. You know, I think there used to be a history book written back in the 1990s somewhere about that. I remember reading about it. And the history book was the creation of the middle ground. And in this middle ground where, you know, the settlers and the indigenous peoples would meet. And in this middle ground, it was a mutual beneficial relationship that emerged, you know. Indigenous people, you know, quickly adapted and utilized the new technology that was coming into, you know, folks by the settlers, and the settlers utilized the traditional knowledge that allowed them to live in, you know, in many parts of what is contemporary United States and in Canada. And I look at our peace and friendship treaties, and I've been reviewing them over and over again recently in light of what's going on. And there is, you know, the treaties are intended to establish the relationship. It is looking at the natural resources, and there is a commercial right, but there are also predominantly trade, you know, treaties. Many of these treaties, from the peace and friendship to the Hudson-Robson treaties to the number treaties to even the modern day treaties that are coming out like Nisga'a or the Yukon self-government agreements, or the, you know, Cree Nasapki, Cree Inuit, James Bay Cree agreements. They are also predominantly about trade or economic development, etc. And there are dispute resolution processes in there. And so, like I look at our the Treaty of 1752, 1760, 61. There's a component saying if there's a dispute between Indigenous peoples and the Crown subjects, that they will recourse to the courts of civil judicature, right? No, so it allows and creates a space for a hybrid middle ground where both Indigenous laws can be put in there and also settler laws, and neither will dominate, but both can be used in the regulation or management or in the conservation or the protection of a particular resource. So in this space, you can have a middle ground, a hybrid approach that you borrow from both Indigenous laws and you borrow from Canadian Western laws, and you utilize them to find the best and the highest protection or conservation that's required for a particular resource.
Thank you, Tuma. That's a wonderful way to wrap up the session. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone. Thank you, Tuma and Albert. Thank you, Clifford, for sharing today. Such wondrous stuff. Again, this session is going to be recorded and available, I believe, on the CRP website. If you guys want to go back and listen, or encourage others to come and share and hear these wonderful words. I also want to thank once again our co-host of the series, West Coast Environmental Law, and to the rest of the CRP team for helping behind the scenes and keeping us on track and making sure we get to all your questions. Thank you so much. So with that, Albert, I'm going to ask you to close the session.
Yes, thank you. Kuchin wakatijino. Amiskar melwi wala ali na ko teji ko kitina mu. Wala ali melwi tilante se kolodi, taji godi, wanta godi kitina mu. Wala man kisin ma pidaya kisku mawagnu de mati. Akada way tantel mawagnu de mati na. Ye waja degem. Nungi get me date tesna, nungi kilo tesna. Tante ujino da. Mawik start to kinen. Mawik start menen na mawik sit khamu. Mawi aboko na matur kinen. Mawe menen. Ako kisi ginam gil. We menen. Itantel det pakot tesne. Tantel ses pedet tesne. Ula mawik sit khamu goi. Tanek mo itlisip. Tante uji basit kilidas warme. Nega yada mo nega boko na munen monda fufmin. Tante uji get mi deed me. Tante uji lidas warme. Tante uji meskuk me. Nega yo tet paroda si. Get mi deed asi. Tet pa ahai tet sedwanegi. Nokte lidas fuftinan. Klabis. Tante si pilgi wulias. Pilgi wula du mausit khamu gowe. Isi mau logo dir. Isi mau ya bokon maruk dir. Atan fister mau egina maruk dir. Kitan igmana igan to goa. As madlisi pilgi wula beru tidak ko de kino. Nadli kitum sugnomo. Thank you.